At dawn, they invaded my land with bolt cutters, intending to seize a boat that had been my late grandfather's. What they failed to realize was that I held the legal title to the entire lake beneath their feet. Let me set the scene. It's 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, and from my kitchen window, I'm observing Karen Brightwater, the HOA president and a resident of just 3 years, marching toward my dock with 2 other board members and a sheriff's deputy in tow. The morning vapor enveloped Lake Meridian like a veil, and the bone-deep groan of 40-year-old dock planks announced their approach to my grandfather's 1985 cabin cruiser. Karen brandished a sheet of paper as if it were some sort of deadly instrument. A notice demanding the removal of my eyesore boat within 72 hours, lest I incur daily fines of $500. She was about to find out she had just initiated a conflict with a Navy veteran who had inherited much more than a simple vessel. What would you do if a power-tripping HOA attempted to confiscate your family's heritage? Share your own nightmare below. Where are you tuning in from? Your local HOA drama likely pales in comparison to this. I'm Marcus Wendell, 52, a retired Navy engineer, and evidently the most significant annoyance in Karen Brightwater's life since her arrival in our tranquil Lake Meridian community 3 years prior. Bringing with her big city aspirations and an even larger ego. Allow me to illustrate how this conflict began. Lake Meridian is located 90 minutes west of Denver, a flawless 200-acre gem encircled by 47 homes that emerged around the area's original homesteads. My grandfather, Clifford, acquired what was then considered worthless swampland by the locals in 1982 for a sum of $8,000. Roughly what Karen likely allocates to her monthly Botox treatments. Clifford, a carpenter who subscribed to the philosophy of doing a job correctly the first time, dedicated 2 summers to hand-building our cabin and its dock. He used cedar planks that, to this day, emit a scent like Christmas morning when the sun warms them perfectly. He would recount tales of battling mosquitoes he swore were the size of hummingbirds as he drove the support posts into the lakebed armed with nothing more than a sledgehammer and sheer determination. The community was a different place back then, populated by families who worked with their hands and children who knew the art of baiting their own hooks. It was a time when neighbors would help you haul a refrigerator, asking for nothing in return but perhaps a cold beer and an engaging story. But times have changed. Enter Karen Brightwater, a real estate agent, the president of the HOA, and the type of individual who would probably require her pool maintenance guy to sign a non-disclosure agreement. She came from Denver with her BMW, her strong architectural convictions, and a grand vision to remake our small piece of paradise into some form of high-end resort community. The first time we crossed paths, she was positioned in my driveway, exuding enough lavender perfume to incapacitate a large animal, and gesturing at my grandfather's boat as if it were a dead skunk. That eyesore is diminishing property values, she declared, forgoing any form of introduction. I presented her with the boat's current registration, the dock permits which had been legally valid since 1983, and the property surveys, all properly recorded and filed with Jefferson County. Your paperwork is of no concern to me, she retorted, and I am certain the woman actually stomped her foot like a petulant child. We have community standards now. It was at that moment I understood we had a serious issue. You see, Karen's complaint wasn't merely about my boat. She was, in a manner of speaking, testing the waters to gauge how far she could push the original families before we offered resistance. Her strategy became apparent in the subsequent months. She had established this HOA in 2018, joined by a cohort of newer residents, transplants from Denver who saw profit margins instead of cherished memories when they gazed at our lake. Their objective was straightforward: exert pressure on the long-standing families to sell their properties for less than they were worth, then renovate and sell them to affluent buyers willing to pay a premium for exclusive lakefront access. My boat was simply her first tactical move. 3 other original families began receiving similar harassing letters regarding aesthetic violations and community enhancement fees. The Hendersons were cited because their vegetable garden was deemed inconsistent with the planned community vision. The Torinos were informed that their children's tire swing posed a liability concern. However, this is something Karen failed to grasp about Navy veterans. We don't buckle under duress, we entrench ourselves, and when an attempt is made to take something that is rightfully ours, something our grandfathers constructed with their own hands, we retaliate with every resource at our disposal. I utilize that boat every weekend for fishing, monitoring water quality, and clearing away debris following storms. It isn't just a mode of transport, it's a mobile repository of family history. Those tackle boxes still contain my grandfather's preferred lures, the very ones he claimed could catch fish in a bathtub. The scent of marine diesel, blended with the old leather of his fishing vest, still permeates the cabin, a scent far more potent and infinitely more genuine than Karen's perfume. She submitted her initial formal HOA complaint on a Tuesday. By Friday, I was crushing that flimsy copy paper in my weathered hands, feeling it crumble like her prospects of browbeating me into submission. But Karen Brightwater was only just beginning, and so was I. The genuine question was not whether she could compel me to relocate my boat. The question was what would transpire when she found out what she was truly attempting to steal. Karen's initial significant power move occurred precisely 1 week following our confrontation in the driveway. She convened an emergency HOA board meeting on a Thursday evening, scheduling it masterfully for a time when the majority of working families were unable to be present, allowing her retired friends from Denver to fill the room like a stacked deck in a card game. I attended nonetheless, still in my work attire and carrying the honest scent of a man who had spent his day repairing Mrs. Patterson's dock as a favor. The community center was thick with the smell of high-end cologne and a sense of entitlement as Karen presented from the front, armed with a PowerPoint presentation that likely cost more to produce than my grandfather's entire boat. Slide 1. She proclaimed with the self-assurance of someone who has rarely been denied anything. Community Beautification Initiative, maintaining property values through aesthetic standards. The proposal itself was elegantly vicious. All watercraft were to adhere to visual compatibility requirements, subject to annual inspections at a cost of $500. Boats exceeding 20 years of age would need to undergo a complete restoration to contemporary standards. Essentially, a directive to either spend $10,000 or leave, and for the final blow, a new annual watercraft assessment of $2,000 for the privilege of mooring one's boat on community waters. 23 of the newer residents nodded in agreement like dashboard ornaments, while the 7 original families sat in shocked disbelief. Karen had prepared thoroughly, displaying charts that illustrated how comparable improvements had boosted property values in Aspen and Vail by 30%. But research was a game two could play. I had dedicated the past week to navigating the Jefferson County Courthouse, sifting through filing cabinets that smelled of decades of bureaucratic inertia and unfulfilled hopes. My training in the Navy impressed upon me that intelligence gathering is more decisive in winning battles than sheer force, and the discovery I made within those antiquated records brought a smile to my face for the first time since this ordeal began. It appeared Karen's little voting maneuver had a critical weakness. During my time stationed in Norfolk, I had assisted a friend in contesting an unlawful HOA fee, and I recalled the lawyer's explanation that Colorado law mandates approval from 67% of all property owners, not merely those present at a vote, for the implementation of new fees or significant rule alterations. Karen's meeting consisted of perhaps 30 individuals in a community of 47 homes. It was simple arithmetic, yet apparently it was beyond the scope of her real estate education. The true revelation, however, was concealed within the original incorporation papers. The HOA's formation in 2018 was deficient, lacking signatures from 8 of the original homesteads, mine included. These signatures were not mere formalities. They were legal prerequisites, transforming Karen's entire power base into an elaborate and costly house of cards. I held my peace until Karen concluded her presentation before rising to my feet. The fluorescent lights hummed above like agitated hornets as I cleared my throat. Miss Brightwater, I have a query regarding your legal standing to levy these fees. Her smile wavered ever so slightly. The HOA board possesses complete discretionary authority over community standards, Mr. Wendell. In fact, you do not. I produced a manila folder, dense with photocopied documents. Your 2018 incorporation is not valid. You lack the necessary signatures from 15% of the original homeowners, as required by Colorado Revised Statutes 38-33, 3-201. The room fell utterly silent, save for the buzzing light and the sound of Karen's reality beginning to fracture. Her attorney, some polished character she had brought from Denver, whispered urgently in her ear, shuffling through papers like a man searching for a flotation device on a sinking vessel. Furthermore, I went on, relishing the way her face was assuming the shade of an overly ripe tomato. The original homesteads possessed perpetual waterfront access rights that were established 36 years before your organization even existed. It was then that Karen revealed the true nature of the person I was up against. Rather than conceding or admitting her error, she resorted to extreme measures. "Mr. Wendell," she stated, her voice sharp enough to shatter glass, "I have been made aware of numerous complaints regarding your aggressive demeanor toward fellow community members. Your military history is a source of concern for many residents who are worried for their personal safety." The accusation landed in the room with the force of a physical impact. Me? Aggressive? I had assisted half of these individuals with moving furniture, provided free plumbing repairs, and taught their children how to fish. Yet, I could see her words taking effect on the newer residents. The insidious suggestion that perhaps the veteran was volatile, unpredictable, just one bad day away from losing control. In fact, Karen pressed on, sensing an advantage. "I will be lodging a formal harassment complaint with the sheriff's office. We have records of you intimidating neighbors with your inquiries about the HOA's legitimacy." It was a brilliant and malevolent tactic. She was reframing my research as stalking, my legal inquiries as intimidation. She was casting the victim as the perpetrator, while positioning herself as the concerned citizen shielding innocent families from a dangerous former soldier. Deputy Jim Torino, whose family had resided here nearly as long as mine, intercepted me in the parking lot later. The gravel crunched beneath our boots as he lit a cigarette, his hands those of a man who had spent 3 decades in construction. "Be careful, Marcus," he advised in a low voice. "Karen has influence downtown, political allies who are indebted to her from her real estate ventures." As I drove home that evening, my headlights piercing the mountain darkness, I discovered something tucked beneath my windshield wiper. A note on simple white paper. "Examine the lake deed. Not all is as it appears, a friend." The contest was just beginning to get captivating. That anonymous message felt like a hot coal in my pocket for 3 days before I mustered the nerve to act on its suggestion. There was something about the phrase, "check the lake deed," that felt like prying open Pandora's box. Once you take a look, you can't return to a state of untroubled ignorance. Karen didn't squander time nursing her pride after the board meeting. In less than 48 hours, she had escalated the situation more rapidly than a blaze in a munitions factory. She established what she termed the Lake Meridian Improvement Committee, backed by a $50,000 fund collected from newer residents who seemingly had cash to spare for HOA-driven vendettas. The initial evidence of her revised plan emerged on a Tuesday morning. Private security boats patrolling the lake as if it were a hub for drug trafficking. 2 men in identical polo shirts and wraparound sunglasses circled in a stylish speedboat that likely cost more than the average person's vehicle. They would linger near my dock for 20-minute intervals, snapping pictures and scribbling notes on waterproof clipboards. Following that were the signs, large, orange warnings erected in every common area, proclaiming, "No unauthorized watercraft, violators will be prosecuted." The legalistic phrasing was quite convincing for a notice that held no real legal power, but Karen was wagering that most people wouldn't distinguish between what was official and what merely looked expensive. I recognized the need for professional guidance, so I followed the enigmatic tip and made my way to the State Archives in Denver. The building had the distinct aroma of old paper and institutional coffee, and the clerk who assisted me appeared as though she had been employed there since Colorado was granted statehood. "You're looking for the original land surveys from 1981? She inquired, looking at me over a pair of reading glasses mended with electrical tape. "Those are located in the basement vault. It's been probably 15 years since anyone has asked for those files." The manila folders she retrieved were as thick as telephone directories and coated in enough dust to trigger a sneezing fit. Yet, concealed within all that bureaucratic paperwork was a detail that made my jaw hit the floor like a lead weight. During my time in the Navy, I had come to understand that property conflicts often hinge on who possesses the most ancient and precise documentation. The advent of GPS technology has uncovered countless boundary inaccuracies from the era before satellites, sometimes altering property lines by hundreds of feet and costing landowners fortunes they were unaware they possessed. The information I unearthed in those archives would have caused Karen to lose consciousness had she known. The initial 1981 land survey indicated that Lake Meridian's boundaries had been improperly recorded in every deed issued after 1983. Contemporary GPS coordinates showed that what was commonly believed to be a single large lake was, in fact, 2 distinct bodies of water, separated by an underwater ridge visible only on the original topographical charts. There was Lake Meridian North, the location of all the upscale homes and Karen's proposed marina development. And then there was Lake Meridian South, a smaller, untouched body of water that, according to the deed I was now staring at in utter disbelief, my grandfather had not merely purchased lakeside property on. He had acquired the entire thing. All water rights, mineral rights, and access easements for Lake Meridian South. The deed stated in faded typewritten letters, Clifford Wendell hadn't just been a shrewd dealmaker. He had been a forward thinker who knew that owning water in Colorado was akin to possessing liquid gold. But Karen was far too preoccupied with her role as a dictator to engage in any real investigation. Her security measures intensified that very week. Suddenly, surveillance cameras began to appear overnight, aimed directly at my dock, as if I were managing some sort of terrorist operation instead of simply trying to enjoy some peaceful fishing. The $500 daily fines were officially implemented, arriving via certified mail with the tenacity of a debt collector and double the animosity. It was then that Karen committed her most significant error to date. She began circulating rumors throughout the town that I was a mentally volatile veteran who might be contemplating acts of violence against the community. The smear campaign was subtle yet potent. Concerned remarks at the grocery store, worried discussions at the gas station, always presented as being out of concern for everyone's well-being. I sought advice from an attorney through a veterans legal assistance program, a sharp woman who had been handling water rights cases across the western states for 2 decades. She elucidated something that made my Navy-trained mind rejoice with tactical glee. In Colorado, as in most western states, water rights are governed by the doctrine of prior appropriation, which dictates that the first individual to apply water to a beneficial use holds absolute priority over all who follow. First in time, first in right. A legal principle dating back to the gold rush era and still as solid as a rock today. The attorney confirmed what those dusty archives had suggested. I didn't just have ownership of a boat slip or access to the lake. I owned the lakebed, the water itself, and every single recreational use right for the whole southern portion of Lake Meridian. That evening, as I sat on my grandfather's dock, listening to the soft lapping of water that was apparently mine, I could detect the smell of diesel fuel polluting the clear air. Karen's security boats were leaking fuel into waters they had no lawful right to be on, infringing upon both my property rights and likely a half-dozen environmental laws. The sound of gravel crunching in my driveway broke my reverie. Unmarked vehicles had been passing by my cabin hourly since the rumors began, and red laser dots from surveying equipment danced over the lake's surface like some kind of sophisticated light display. Karen believed she was closing in for the kill. She was oblivious to the fact that she was stepping into a trap that had been set 4 decades prior. Karen's subsequent action demonstrated that she had entirely lost her grip on reality. On a serene Saturday morning, as I was hosting a family barbecue to celebrate my nephew's birthday, a process server arrived brandishing a restraining order, which alleged that I had made threats against her during the public meeting. Imagine the scene. 12 family members, among them 3 children under the age of 10, witnessing Uncle Marcus being served legal documents while hamburgers sizzled away on the grill. The server, a young man who looked barely old enough to need a razor, fumbled through his script about maintaining a 500-foot distance from Karen, all while my 8-year-old niece inquired why the man was attempting to take me into custody. It was a masterfully timed act of maximum humiliation. Karen had orchestrated this event with the precision of a Broadway show, and I had to acknowledge the sheer spite of it, even as my blood pressure surged to a level that could have powered a small town. However, if Karen believed she could shame me into surrendering, she had grossly misjudged what 4 decades of navigating military bureaucracy imparts to a man about the virtues of patience and systematic planning. While she was occupied with contacting Denver television stations to spread stories about a disturbed veteran menacing a tranquil community, I was methodically assembling the kind of evidence that secures victories in court. Each instance of harassment was documented, with photographs, timestamps, and GPS coordinates. Every conversation was recorded. A perfectly legal practice in Colorado, where the consent of only one party is required. Every witness statement was notarized and properly filed. I had adopted this strategy during a property disagreement back in my Virginia Beach days, where a neighbor attempted to claim our fence encroached on his property. It turns out that judges have a strong preference for defendants who present organized evidence rather than impassioned narratives. In legal battles, documentation consistently trumps emotion. The professional land survey I had arranged for uncovered a fact that rendered Karen's marina aspirations even more unattainable than she knew. Not only was I the owner of the smaller lake, but my property line also extended 50 feet into the larger lake. Right where every single dock on the North Shore had been constructed, those luxurious waterfront residences weren't merely adjacent to my property. They were, in part, situated on it. Karen's campaign to tarnish my reputation escalated. Resembling a full-scale propaganda offensive, she established a Facebook group named Concerned Lake Meridian Residents and began to share artfully cropped images of my deteriorating boat and property. The photographs made my grandfather's classic cabin cruiser appear as if it had been washed ashore by a hurricane, and my rustic cabin seemed on the verge of being condemned. She organized safety patrols, which were essentially HOS-sponsored vigilantes in matching visors who drove past my cabin hourly. Like a suburban secret police force, the psychological warfare was sophisticated and unyielding, crafted to make me break under the relentless pressure. But Karen made a crucial mistake in her intelligence-gathering efforts. She approached my neighbor, Ezra Blackstone, assuming the 78-year-old retired schoolteacher would be an easy target for manipulation. Ezra, having taught 8th grade for 40 years, could identify a swindler from 3 counties away. That woman offered me $200,000 for my cabin. Ezra informed me over coffee that had the consistency of motor oil and the flavor of wisdom. A cash transaction, to be closed in 30 days. The issue is, the county assessor values my property at $70,000 at most. Savvy buyers who offer 3 times the market value always possess information the seller does not. Usually that the land sits on oil, holds valuable minerals, or is set to be worth millions once a development project is approved. Karen wasn't being charitable. She was attempting to swindle generational wealth from the very families who had built this community with their own labor. The harassment progressed from psychological tactics to outright sabotage. My mailbox was vandalized on 3 separate occasions in a single week. Smashed with baseball bats, adorned with creative obscenities and spray paint, and, in one instance, filled with dog feces in a paper bag. Classy touches that truly highlighted Karen's refinement. Subsequently, someone tampered with my boat's fuel tank by adding sugar, resulting in $1,200 worth of engine damage. The mechanic at the repair shop shook his head as he displayed the crystallized substance obstructing my fuel injectors. "I've seen this before," he remarked, wiping his greasy hands on overalls that had seen better days. "It usually occurs during acrimonious divorces or disputes between neighbors. Sugar doesn't dissolve in gasoline. It just transforms everything into a costly, syrupy mess." Anonymous tips to the VA alleged that I was unstable, which prompted wellness checks. That brought concerned social workers to my doorstep to inquire about my mental state. These visits were professional, demeaning, and calculated to generate an official paper trail that would bolster Karen's narrative of the dangerous veteran. But Karen's most significant blunder was to schedule an emergency community meeting for Labor Day weekend with a single item on the agenda: a final vote on the removal of watercraft and the enhancement of security. She was engineering a confrontation, wagering that I would either yield to the pressure or do something foolish that would validate her assertions about my instability. The sharp smell of smoke from a controlled burn on an adjacent property, clearly timed to disrupt my barbecue, mingled with the tacky residue from harassment flyers that someone had affixed to my truck during the night. The incessant hum of security boat engines had shattered the tranquility of the lake's mornings, replacing the sound of birdsong with the mechanical drone of Karen's paranoia. As I scraped those flyers from my windshield, the adhesive sticking beneath my fingernails, I came to a realization. Karen had just provided me with the ideal opening. She desired a conclusive confrontation. So be it. It was time to demonstrate to her what occurs when you back a Navy veteran who has spent 3 months meticulously constructing an unassailable case. The phone call that altered the course of events arrived from my attorney on a Wednesday morning, as I was sipping coffee and observing Karen's security personnel circling my lake like sharks clad in polo shirts. "Marcus, you're going to want to be sitting down for this," she advised, and I could hear the rustle of papers over the line. "We conducted a background check on Karen Brightwater, and she's more than just a real estate agent. She's a developer." My coffee mug paused in mid-air. "What are you trying to say?" "Mountain Vista Properties, that's her firm. She has purchase agreements already finalized for 12 lakefront properties, all dependent on the approval of community improvements. This entire HOA harassment strategy, it's a business venture. The various elements clicked into place with the precision of a well-orchestrated demolition. Karen hadn't relocated here for the natural beauty or the community atmosphere. She had come to orchestrate the most elaborate property acquisition scheme I had ever witnessed, and I had been naive enough to believe it was all about my boat. My attorney proceeded to read from what sounded like a substantial file. Her financial backers are a Denver-based development group with a $50 million budget for a project called the Lake Meridian Resort and Marina. They intend to acquire all the original family properties at reduced prices, then construct luxury condominiums complete with a private yacht club charging $500,000 for membership. I had encountered this strategy before during my service in the Navy, observing developers hovering around military bases like carrion birds whenever rumors of closure began to circulate. They would target the families with the fewest resources, coerce them into selling out of panic, and then resell the properties for enormous profits. It was, strictly speaking, legal, but it decimated communities that had taken generations to establish. Here's the part that will truly infuriate you, she went on. Karen needs your boat removed because its presence validates the legitimate water rights of the original homeowners. If people observe you using the lake without restriction, it weakens her entire argument about requiring exclusive access for the resort's development. But the most startling revelation came when she began to recite from the property records. Marcus, were you aware that your grandfather's deed contains something referred to as perpetual easement rights across what is now the main community road? I nearly let the phone slip from my grasp. What does that entail? It means that Karen's entire development project is unfeasible without your consent. Every truck, every construction team, every future guest of the resort would be required to traverse your land to get to the marina location. You don't just possess the lake. You possess the sole legal means of access to it. The full extent of Karen's desperation suddenly became crystal clear. She wasn't merely attempting to get rid of an eyesore. She was trying to neutralize the single greatest obstacle to a $50 million development enterprise. My grandfather's $8,000 investment in worthless swampland had, by chance, put a stop to a scheme that had been 40 years in the making. There's more? My attorney added, and I could detect a note of triumph in her voice. Lake Meridian South is designated as critical wildlife habitat for the Colorado River cutthroat trout. Your grandfather entered into a conservation easement in 1984 that offers significant tax advantages but permanently prohibits any commercial development. Federal environmental protection statutes invariably take precedence over local development plans. Karen might be able to construct her marina over my dead body, but she would first have to contend with the Endangered Species Act, a legal fight that would cost millions and drag on for decades. It was at this point that Karen's lawyer made the anticipated call. The proposal was presented with all the subtlety of a gangster in a children's movie. $500,000 in cash for a discreet sale, accompanied by subtle allusions to unfortunate accidents that occasionally happen to obstinate homeowners who failed to appreciate the importance of community cooperation. You have 48 hours to make a decision, he stated, before the community takes matters into its own hands. I concluded the call and went out to my dock, gazing out over the water that was apparently mine, shielded by laws that Karen had never taken the time to investigate. The morning sun transformed the lake's surface into liquid gold, and I could smell the pure mountain air that her diesel-powered security boats had not yet managed to foul. Karen Brightwater had just committed the most significant error of her scheming existence. She had issued a threat to a Navy veteran who was now fully aware of what she was attempting to purloin. It was time to show her what genuine strategy looked like. The command center I established in my grandfather's cabin resembled something out of a military intelligence post. If such posts were run from a 1980s wood-paneled living room that smelled of pine needles and 4 decades of honest work. 3 folding tables were laden with legal papers, survey maps, environmental assessments, and a detailed record of harassment that would have brought tears of joy to a federal prosecutor. My attorney from the Veterans Legal Aid Program had put me in touch with an environmental law clinic at the University of Colorado. In no time, I had a dedicated team of enthusiastic law students who were treating Karen's scheme as their personal battle against corporate avarice. The lead counsel, a formidable woman named Rebecca Martinez with 15 years of experience in water rights litigation, outlined our plan with the meticulousness of a surgeon preparing for open-heart surgery. Our goal isn't just to halt Karen, she explained, spreading maps over my coffee table. We aim to dismantle her entire enterprise so comprehensively that no developer will dare to attempt something similar ever again. First up was the discovery of the Underwater Archaeological Survey. When law students are given unlimited time and access to state records, they unearth details that professional investigators might overlook. It turned out that the lake bed held artifacts from a Ute fishing camp that was 300 years old, a finding that activated federal archaeological protection laws and rendered Karen's marina project as legally sound as building a casino in Yellowstone. My time in the Navy had taught me that environmental laws are like icebergs. The visible part is insignificant compared to what lies beneath. A single phone call to the State Historical Preservation Office brought a team of archaeologists who corroborated the students' findings. Lake Meridian South was now safeguarded under the National Historic Preservation Act. Ezra Blackstone proved to be more than just a helpful neighbor. The man had been organizing community resistance efforts since before Karen was even born. Within a week, he had formed the original Families Coalition, a group of 7 households that represented 40 years of the lake's history. Each family provided evidence that documented Karen's systematic campaign of harassment. "I've been an educator for 40 years, Ezra remarked, adjusting a pair of glasses that had witnessed more school board meetings than most politicians. "You develop a knack for identifying bullies early on, and the most effective way to deal with them is to make them answer for their actions in front of everyone they are trying to intimidate." Deputy Jim Torino offered something even more precious than moral encouragement. Police report numbers, every baseless complaint Karen had lodged, every allegation of harassment, and every wellness check she had initiated was officially recorded, revealing a distinct pattern of abuse. When law enforcement officials begin to notice the same individual filing reports week after week, they start to question their motives. The media approach came together seamlessly. Like the pieces of a complex puzzle, Rebecca had contacts with environmental journalists at the Denver Post who had experience covering similar development controversies throughout Colorado. These reporters specialized in David versus Goliath narratives, where small communities stood up to corporate aggressors, and Karen's scheme possessed all the components of a Pulitzer Prize-worthy investigation. Local newspapers thrive on stories like this, Rebecca noted, while marking key sections in a legal brief that was thick enough to deflect a bullet. Environmental degradation, harassment of a veteran, corporate greed, violations of federal law. It's a perfect storm of everything readers love to despise. The technical documentation phase brought to light the full extent of Karen's environmental transgressions. Water quality analyses I had commissioned revealed that her security boats had discharged enough fuel to be in violation of the Clean Water Act in 17 separate instances. Each patrol resulted in a quantifiable level of petroleum pollution that could lead to EPA enforcement actions, with potential daily fines of $25,000. During my own inquiries, I learned that any citizen can obtain EPA records of water quality violations for any body of water in the United States through the Freedom of Information Act. A search of the database showed that Lake Meridian had a perfect record until Karen's boats began their patrols, establishing a clear before and after timeline that would have environmental prosecutors ecstatic. GPS data confirmed that Karen's orange warning signs had been placed on federal conservation land, which meant her no unauthorized watercraft campaign was, in fact, an illegal occupation of a protected habitat. The irony was exquisite. While she was threatening to have me arrested for trespassing, she had been committing actual federal offenses on a daily basis for 3 months. Financial warfare necessitated a different set of tactics. My attorney tallied up the damages, and the figures were staggering. $50,000 for harassment-related costs, $2.5 million in diminished property value due to her smear campaign, plus environmental cleanup expenses that could easily reach 6 figures. Karen's company, Mountain Vista Properties, was on the verge of facing legal actions that would deplete her $50 million development fund more quickly than the morning mist dissipates. The complaint filed with the Colorado Real Estate Commission was a personal highlight. Real estate professionals can have their licenses suspended for failing to disclose conflicts of interest, and Karen had been negotiating property acquisitions while concurrently harassing the same homeowners through her position in the HOA. A breach of professional ethics that would spell the end of her career, even if she managed to avoid criminal conviction. The compiled evidence filled 3 large boxes, containing 847 photographs, 23 hours of legally obtained audio recordings, and financial documents that demonstrated Karen's company had secured development permits before she had even become a resident of our community. As I sorted the final documents, inhaling the familiar scent of fresh ink and legal papers, I felt the reassuring weight of business cards from newfound allies. Lawyers, environmental organizations, investigative journalists, and federal agents who had made their careers dismantling schemes just like Karen's. The trap had been laid. All I had to do now was wait for her to step into it. Karen's desperation reached a new peak as she saw her Labor Day deadline drawing near with no sign of me yielding. Desperate individuals are prone to making foolish errors, and Karen was on the verge of making enough of them to warrant a federal indictment. The initial indication appeared at 3:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, when my newly installed infrared security cameras captured 3 individuals dumping motor oil adjacent to my dock. The night vision footage was as sharp as a high-definition broadcast. Karen herself, flanked by 2 HOA board members, pouring automotive lubricants into the pristine lake water. Clad in dark attire like a suburban eco-terrorist group, I had set up those cameras after learning a valuable lesson during my time in Norfolk. Always document every detail when interacting with people who believe the rules do not apply to them. The infrared system recorded not only their faces but also the license plate of Karen's BMW as they made their escape, resembling guilty teenagers after a poorly executed prank. By 6:00 a.m., I had uploaded the video to a secure cloud-based server and distributed copies to my attorney, Deputy Torino, and the EPA's Environmental Crimes Hotline in Colorado. It is perfectly legal for security cameras on one's own property to record continuously, and what they had captured was sufficient to bring charges of criminal environmental destruction against Karen. But Karen's self-sabotage was far from over. That very morning, she submitted a fraudulent report to the EPA, alleging that I was contaminating the lake with fuel from my boat. The irony was so palpable it was almost tangible. While she was actively dumping motor oil into water she did not own, she was accusing me of the same offense. The EPA inspector who arrived on the scene was a no-nonsense professional who had been investigating environmental crimes since before Karen had even discovered her first tube of mascara. She took a single glance at my immaculate boat maintenance logs and water quality reports, then began to ask some very direct questions about the fresh oil slick near my dock, which was clearly not from my fuel tank. "Sir," she remarked, crouching at the water's edge with equipment that looked costly enough to purchase a small car. "This petroleum signature is not consistent with marine diesel. This is automotive motor oil, and it was deposited here very recently." Karen's campaign of political pressure escalated to a level that would have impressed even totalitarian regimes. She reached out to county commissioners, asserting that I was a dangerous veteran who posed a threat to community safety, circulated a petition calling for a psychiatric assessment, and even posted fabricated online reviews that claimed my military service had been less than honorable. Yet, every action she took only served to provide more evidence for my legal team. The fraudulent reviews were in violation of federal laws protecting veterans from defamation. The demand for a psychiatric evaluation could be construed as harassment under Colorado's disability rights laws, and the county commissioners grew wary as the same woman persisted in filing complaints against the same man week after week. The debt collection agency that Karen engaged to enforce the HOA fines inadvertently contributed to my case by trying to place a lien on my property based on a fraudulent HOA board vote. The problem was, you cannot place a lien on property that is not governed by an HOA's authority. This attempt generated a paper trail of deliberate property theft that would have brought a smile to any prosecutor's face. I had learned from a prior property dispute that liens can be contested within 30 days in most states, and filing a false lien comes with severe repercussions, including the payment of attorney's fees and punitive damages. Karen's attempt to place a lien was not only unlawful, it was foolish enough to warrant federal mail fraud charges. My homeowner's insurance company initiated its own inquiry into the accidental damage to my boat. Their fraud investigator was a retired FBI agent who had a knack for identifying patterns. Within a week, she had linked my case to a series of similar suspicious events connected to Karen's previous development projects in 3 other Colorado communities. "Mr. Wendell," she stated during our interview at my kitchen table, "your case is not an isolated one. We have found identical patterns of harassment in Breckenridge, Steamboat Springs, and Grand Junction, the same developer, the same methods, the same mysterious accidents befalling anyone who refuses to sell." The harassment campaign reached a farcical pitch when Karen's allies began to block my driveway with their vehicles, made harassing phone calls at all hours of the day and night, and disseminated my military records online. a clear violation of federal privacy laws for veterans. Each of these acts was documented, recorded, and added to a burgeoning file that was beginning to resemble the evidence for a racketeering investigation. But the most gratifying turn of events came when the Denver Post journalist I had reached out to published the first installment of what would become an investigative series on HOA abuses. The headline declared, "Veteran Harassment Scheme Targets Military Families Across Colorado," and Karen's meticulously crafted public persona started to disintegrate more rapidly than a house constructed on thin ice. Environmental organizations came forward with evidence of similar illicit development schemes, and television news crews began to film around the lake, as if it were a nature documentary about corporate predators in their native environment. The constant drone of news helicopters, combined with the sharp scent of flashbulbs from photographers' equipment, created an atmosphere akin to a crime scene investigation. My attorney submitted a formal complaint to the Colorado Attorney General regarding HOA fraud, providing detailed accounts of financial losses from missed work due to the relentless legal harassment, medical expenses for stress-induced health problems, and security costs that were depleting my Navy pension faster than Karen could utter the phrase community standards. The media investigation was gathering force like an unstoppable avalanche, and Karen was positioned directly in its path. Karen's final, desperate maneuver demonstrated that she had completely detached from reality. She engaged a private investigator to unearth some discreditable information about my military career, apparently under the delusion that she could discover a scandal that would vindicate her months of harassment. What she unearthed instead was a record of heroism so extensive that it made her appear as though she were targeting Captain America himself. The investigator's report, which I acquired through my attorney's discovery motion, read like the script for a military awards ceremony. A Navy Cross for rescuing 12 sailors during a fire on a ship off the coast of Somalia. Multiple commendations for environmental restoration at 3 different naval bases, and an impeccable service record of 22 years with not a single disciplinary infraction. But it was here that Karen's desperation escalated into outright criminal behavior. She attempted to bribe Deputy Torino to issue a fraudulent arrest warrant for me. The exchange took place in the parking lot of Miller's Hardware, where Jim had gone to purchase fence posts, and Karen approached him with an envelope filled with $5,000 in cash. "Just submit a domestic disturbance report," she urged, according to the recording Jim captured on his phone. "Claim you got an anonymous tip about violent threats. We can work out the specifics later." Jim Torino, a police officer for 15 years, knew an attempted bribe when he heard one. He also understood that recording such an attempt is not only legal in Colorado but is practically a requirement when dealing with someone who is systematically trying to frame innocent individuals. The FBI's Environmental Crimes Division launched its investigation after examining Karen's consistent pattern of harassment across multiple states. It turned out that her company, Mountain Vista Properties, had been executing identical schemes in Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico, with a laser-like focus on veteran and fixed-income homeowners. What I had perceived as a personal vendetta was, in fact, a federal criminal operation. Karen's Denver-based investors withdrew their financial support more swiftly than tourists escaping a forest fire. Once the FBI's investigation was made public, $50 million in development capital vanished overnight as newspaper headlines began to trumpet federal investigation into veteran harassment scheme and environmental crimes linked to development fraud. Prudent investors flee when federal agents start asking questions, and Karen's elaborately constructed enterprise crumbled with the spectacular finality of a planned implosion. 2 members of the HOA board tendered their resignations, citing ethical concerns about Karen's tactics, a political euphemism for, "We are abandoning this sinking vessel before the FBI comes to question us." When board members start to desert, it is usually a sign that the scheme is unsalvageable. The individual who ultimately brought down Karen's entire operation was none other than her own assistant, a young woman named Sarah, who had been meticulously documenting Karen's illicit activities for months while discreetly collaborating with federal authorities. Sarah provided recordings of Karen confessing to environmental sabotage, property fraud, and a conspiracy to harass veterans. "She instructed me to frame you for environmental offenses," Sarah stated during the deposition that would ultimately lead to Karen's conviction. "She wanted me to plant fabricated evidence of fuel leaks near your dock and then alert the EPA. When I refused, she threatened to terminate my employment and sabotage my real estate career." The national media seized upon the story with the veracity of sharks detecting blood in the water. HOA harassment of war hero became a sensational topic on cable news, and environmental groups organized a Save Lake Meridian campaign that garnered support from all corners of the country. My GoFundMe page for legal fees raised $75,000 in just 48 hours from individuals who had endured similar abuses. By HOAs, Karen's network of supporters disintegrated like a sandcastle against a rising tide. The private security firm ceased its patrols upon discovering they had been operating without the necessary permits on protected federal land. The collection agency retreated when it became clear that the liens they had filed were fraudulent. Even Karen's Denver-based attorney quietly stepped away from the case after reviewing the overwhelming body of evidence against his client. In a final, desperate act, Karen accosted me at Miller's Hardware, the very location where she had attempted to bribe Deputy Torino. She was standing by my truck as I emerged with supplies for dock repairs. Her expression was contorted with the type of fury that arises from watching a $50 million dream transform into a series of federal felony charges. "This is entirely your fault," she yelled, loud enough for half the town to witness. "You could have simply moved your ridiculous boat, but you insisted on ruining everything." 3 customers and the parking lot's security camera recorded her threatening me with physical harm, vowing that I would come to regret destroying her life and cautioning that accidents happen to those who don't know when to back down. That evening, someone spray-painted the word "traitor" across my truck in letters large enough to be seen from orbit. The store's security footage captured Karen's BMW arriving at 2:00 a.m. and departing 5 minutes later, providing ample evidence for vandalism charges that would be a violation of her bail conditions. As I contacted Deputy Torino to report this latest offense, inhaling the sharp odor of spray paint that still clung to my truck's exterior, I understood that Karen had, at last, given me the perfect opening for our final confrontation. She had arranged one last community vote to eliminate dangerous elements, intending to present fabricated evidence and bring this conflict to a decisive end. That was perfectly acceptable to me. It was time to settle this once and for all. The Lake Meridian Community Center had never witnessed a spectacle quite like the one that unfolded on Labor Day evening. 200 people were packed into a room intended for 50, joined by news crews from 4 Denver television stations, environmental journalists from 3 national publications, and federal agents who stood at the back, silent observers of the proceedings. Karen was completely unaware that she was walking into her own public downfall. She had spent the week meticulously crafting what she believed would be her crowning achievement. A presentation filled with doctored water quality reports that indicated pollution from my boat and staged photographs that claimed environmental harm. The woman genuinely thought she could deceive her way out of federal charges, even with FBI agents literally taking notes just a few feet away. I took a seat in the front row with my legal counsel, observing as Karen prepared her PowerPoint with the self-assurance of someone who has never had to face any real repercussions in her life of privilege. The projector screen lit up with her introductory slide. "Protecting our community. Final actions against environmental threats. Ladies and gentlemen," Karen declared, with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument in a murder trial. "Tonight, we will vote to permanently eliminate the environmental menace that jeopardizes our lovely lake community." She advanced to her first piece of fabricated evidence. A picture of my grandfather's boat, with what looked like digitally added oil slicks in the surrounding water. The image was convincing enough to deceive a casual onlooker, but she had made a fatal mistake. She had photoshopped pollution into water that was legally mine, not the community's. As you can plainly see, Karen went on, gesturing at her counterfeit evidence with a laser pointer that quivered slightly in her unsteady hand. "This boat has been discharging petroleum byproducts into our immaculate waters for months." It was at that moment that I rose to my feet and the room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the whirring of news cameras, swiveling to capture what everyone instinctively knew would be the turning point of this entire affair. "Ms. Brightwater," I stated, my voice imbued with the composed authority that 22 years in the Navy teaches you, "I have a question regarding your legal authority to police my property." Her laser pointer froze in midair. "The HOA has complete jurisdiction over community waters, Mr. Wendell. In fact, you do not." I made my way to the front of the room and plugged my laptop into the projector, supplanting Karen's fabrications with legal reality. Because those are not community waters. The first document to appear on the screen was my grandfather's original 1982 deed, signed and notarized in ink that, though faded, told no lies. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the lawful owner of Lake Meridian South. My grandfather, Clifford Wendell, who acquired not just the lakefront land, but the entire body of water that has been the subject of this dispute. Collective gasp rippled through the room like a sudden clap of thunder. Karen's face turned as pale as a fresh snowfall as the full weight of the situation crashed down on her like a freight train loaded with 4 decades of legal repercussions. Furthermore, I added, moving to the next slide, which displayed the results of the professional survey. Your proposed marina development would be constructed entirely on my private land, which clarifies why you have been so determined to force me out. The room descended into a flurry of confused murmurs as the attendees began to grasp that they had been witnessing Karen's attempt to steal millions of dollars worth of lakefront property through an intricate scheme of HOA harassment. The news cameras documented every second of her world imploding in real time. That's not possible, Karen shrieked, shedding all semblance of professional decorum. Those papers are forgeries, part of a veteran conspiracy. Deputy Torino advanced with the quiet contentment of a man who had been anticipating this moment for months. Ms. Brightwater, you are being placed under arrest for the attempted bribery of a law enforcement officer, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The sound of the handcuffs snapping shut around Karen's wrists was the most gratifying sound I had heard since the day of my military discharge, but the truly definitive moment arrived when the EPA agent stood up and formally announced the criminal inquiry into her development firm. Mountain Vista Properties is the subject of a federal investigation for environmental fraud, harassment of veterans, and racketeering activities across 4 states, Agent Martinez stated. As Karen fought against the unyielding handcuffs, we have identified a consistent pattern of targeting military families and fixed-income homeowners through the systematic abuse of HOA authority. The FBI agent then joined the proceedings, serving warrants for Karen's financial records pertaining to the harassment scheme. It became clear that federal agencies had been meticulously compiling a comprehensive case that was likely to result in a federal prison sentence of 5 to 10 years. But my most cherished moment came when I delivered my final statement. I am making an offer to sell lake access easements to all legitimate members of this community for the price of $1 each, and I am founding the Clifford Wendell Memorial Wildlife Preserve to ensure this lake is protected for all time. The ensuing standing ovation from the original families and the supportive newer residents completely drowned out Karen's frantic protests. As the news cameras captured her being escorted out through a crowd of people she had spent months terrorizing, her multi-million-dollar development ambitions vanished like the morning mist, replaced by federal felony charges and an indelible stain on her reputation. Environmental organizations hailed Lake Meridian as a paradigm for community-driven conservation, while the Denver Post journalist informed me that her investigative series was being considered for a Pulitzer Prize. Karen Brightwater had initiated a conflict with the wrong Navy veteran, and now the entire world was witnessing her face the consequences. Justice had been delivered, with a generous helping of lasting humiliation. 6 months have passed, and I am now seated on my grandfather's dock, observing the sunrise as it colors Lake Meridian with hues of gold and endless potential. I am breathing in air that is no longer tainted by the smell of diesel from harassment patrol boats. The tranquility is disturbed only by the gentle lapping of pristine water against cedar planks and the occasional splash of a Colorado River cutthroat trout, the very endangered species that played a role in sending Karen to a federal penitentiary. Karen Brightwater entered a guilty plea to 17 federal counts and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. In addition to paying $200,000 in restitution, her real estate license was permanently taken away, and Mountain Vista Properties was dissolved amidst bankruptcy proceedings, following a barrage of lawsuits from investors who had lost a combined $50 million by supporting her deceptive ventures. When federal plea deals are reached so swiftly, it typically indicates that the evidence was too compelling to even consider a trial, and Karen's legal team knew they were defending a client who had been caught in the act by FBI surveillance. The harassment lawsuit I brought against her was settled for $2 million, a sum that provided me with peace of mind and the means to fund something far more valuable, the new HOA board, comprised of a blend of original families and sensible newer residents. now functions under a set of bylaws that mandate transparency, equity, and genuine legal standing before any decisions are made. Property values have climbed by 40% since Lake Meridian was granted Colorado's first community-protected watershed status, demonstrating that preserving the environment can be more lucrative than destroying it. I have utilized the settlement funds to transform my grandfather's cabin into a family retreat, a place that not only honors his legacy but also benefits the community he cherished. The University of Colorado has since established a lake ecology research facility in collaboration with our community, offering continuous environmental surveillance at no charge while providing graduate students with invaluable, hands-on experience in the preservation of untouched ecosystems. Lake Meridian is now a blueprint for 15 other communities that are facing similar developmental pressures across Colorado and its neighboring states. My grandfather's $8,000 purchase of worthless swampland has become the foundation of a conservation initiative that now safeguards thousands of acres from corporate interests that view rural communities as soft targets. The Governor's Environmental Protection Award now rests on my mantelpiece, alongside my grandfather's fishing photographs, serving as a reminder that, at times, the most profound way to honor the past is by safeguarding the future. The original families have witnessed their property values skyrocket as a result of the permanent conservation measures. Meanwhile, the Veteran Property Rights Legal Fund, which I founded, assists other victims of harassment in their battles against HOA overreach. Karen's dramatic demise has become a cautionary tale, prompting the Colorado legislature to enact the HOA Reform Act, which now requires independent review of harassment claims and imposes criminal sanctions for systematic intimidation. Individual legal battles often trigger wider legislative changes when they bring systemic issues to light, and Karen's federal conviction has sent a clear signal to developers throughout the West that targeting veterans will have severe repercussions. The inaugural Lake Meridian Conservation Festival drew a crowd of 2,000 people who came to commemorate community-led environmental stewardship while partaking in fishing, hiking, and educational activities. My grandfather's boat, the Persistence, now serves as the festival's main attraction, having been transformed from Karen's eyesore into a powerful symbol of how everyday individuals can overcome corporate machinations through resolve and meticulous legal groundwork. Environmental festivals bring in substantial tourism income to rural areas while also educating the public about successful conservation efforts, proving that protecting the natural world can be both ethically sound and financially beneficial. Local merchants reported their highest sales in years during the festival weekend, with attendees commending the unspoiled lake and the community that rallied to protect it. Conducting weekend workshops on understanding one's property rights has become my new passion in retirement, as I help other homeowners to grasp what they truly possess before any HOA bullies attempt to take it from them. The sharing of knowledge fosters enduring, positive change by empowering potential future victims, and each homeowner who successfully stands up for their rights makes the next Karen reconsider targeting rural communities. The sense of peace I have discovered through environmental advocacy and community involvement feels like the true reward my grandfather would have wished for. His investment in worthless swampland has not only preserved our family's heritage but has also protected an entire ecosystem for future generations who will never have to hear the name Karen Brightwater. Just last week, I got a letter from a veteran in Montana whose HOA is attempting to take away his solar panels by citing fabricated aesthetic violations. It seems some people are slow to learn, but that's perfectly fine with me. It's time to make another phone call. What is your most dreadful HOA story? Share it in the comments. Your experience could be featured next. And we thoroughly enjoy seeing justice brought to petty despots who forget that Americans will not relinquish their family property without a fight. Click subscribe if you took pleasure in watching Karen receive her just desserts. We have many more stories where the underdog triumphs over the giant, and believe me, the next one is even more compelling. Thank you for joining us on End for HOA, where the HOA Karens finally meet their match. If this story made you cheer or wince, please give the video a like. Leave a comment with your thoughts and be sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next incredible HOA saga.